Minister Gould, you're saying social media companies aren't necessarily playing ball and they're not where you want them to be. Other countries have started going down the path of regulation, of legislation, of taking more serious actions to say, well, if you don't want to play ball too bad, we're gonna make you get there. It hasn't seemed like we have even had that conversation yet. Obviously, time is more or less up before the next election for any sort of serious consultations or legislative process. Are we kind of just stuck asking them nicely?
I wouldn't say that. And I think that there is a conversation that we've been having with social media platforms to say, this is something that you could do on your own, right? But in the absence of you doing it on your own, then we need to look at other mechanisms. I will note that the UK has released a white paper today with regards to regulating social media and what that looks like. We are having active conversations with our partners and allies around the world as to what this would look like in the Canadian context. And I would also say that this is not something that we wouldn't pursue going down here in Canada. I mean, this is part of the conversation that we are having, and I think that if there was a moment and an opportunity, that we would seriously look into how we can move forward. And I think that when it comes to consultation on regulation, that's something that we absolutely have time for.
Raymond Fillion, TVA.
How is it that social media aren't cooperating, in your opinion, responding to your polite request? Well, I think they think it'll take a lot of resources. They think they're doing already everything they can. And in some cases, it's because the market here in Canada isn't big enough. I believe you've all seen Mr. Zuckerberg's note a week ago on Facebook. He said that governments need to regulate us, but please, can it be one regulation for the entire world? I think he thinks it would be complicated and difficult, and they have their reasons. Digital platforms are a part of every aspect of our modern lives here in Canada and elsewhere in the world. But I think that there are still certain values and principles that we expect all businesses, all private sector businesses to follow, and the digital platforms are not unique in that respect. They should not be exempt. They should comply with those values too. So they're making arguments that are perhaps philosophical or based on business decisions, but in my view, if they wish to continue operating here in Canada, they should ensure that they're following the values that our legislation is based on. I think that's something that we're looking at very closely.
Minister Gould, what specifically aren't you getting from these social media companies? What actions would you like to have seen them take by now to protect Canada's democratic process?
So I would have liked to see more transparency with Canadians with the actions that they are taking. Right now, we only hear from social media companies when they decide to share information with us, and I think we would like to see more regular reporting, something similar to what they have in the EU with the Code of Practice leading up to the EU elections. That has not been something that any of the platforms have been very interested in pursuing here in Canada. I've talked to them about kind of Canada 2 principles, so for programs and projects that they've rolled out in other jurisdictions with regards to their elections, to apply those here in Canada, and those have received different levels of interest from the platforms, but I haven't seen a willingness or keenness to respond actively here in Canada, and I think that's disappointing because I think Canadians deserve more than that.
Why? Why don't you think that you're getting I mean, so you're saying they're doing some of these things to the EU. You're saying there's a white paper in the UK. So why are they doing this in Canada? Why aren't you seeing what you like from these companies?
You know, that's a good question, and I think that's something that we should be asking the social media platforms, why they don't think that Canadians should be getting the same amount of attention as other people around the world in other countries. And I think that's something that we should definitely put to the platforms. You know, I have, and their response is always Canada is an important market, but I don't see them demonstrating that with actions. I would say that, you know, I wouldn't paint them all with the exact same brush. You know, Facebook has taken a few more steps than perhaps Google or Twitter, but it's still not sufficient. I think there's much more that they could do, and I think it gets a lot at their core practices in terms of how you know, how their algorithms work, what their profit desires are, and you know, until they think that they are going to be forced to make those changes, I don't think that they will willingly do it. And I think that's disappointing because, you know, here in Canada we have certain values that are infused in our laws, and you know, just because they're operating in cyberspace and at the digital level doesn't mean that they shouldn't respect the spirit of what we have come to expect as a society and the standards that we uphold.
Melanie Marquis, La Presse.
Bonjour, Madame Gould.
Good morning, Ms. Gould. There have been some diplomatic conflicts with China, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. What are the consequences for the upcoming election in 2019? What I always say is that Canada, as a member of the G7, NATO, and the Five Eyes, and as a powerful voice internationally, we make a vulnerable target when it comes to foreign interference. We are a principled voice on the international scene. We have to expect that we could be a target for foreign interference in the next election. And I believe we should always stand up for our values and democratic principles. But as Canadians, we should be alert, vigilant, and aware that we are a target for foreigners seeking to undermine our democratic values. At the same time, it's the same principles that guide us internationally as domestically here in Canada. Perhaps the official could respond too about the security of communications. Do you see Canada's vulnerability increasing because China and Russia are among the most active cyber attackers? What I would say, and you can answer perhaps afterwards, is that Canada has a long history of defending human rights, and foreign interference is nothing new. We've been dealing with foreign interference for years, but the fact that it's happening in cyberspace is a new tool that can reach voters more directly than before. And that's something that's changed. And we saw that in the U.S. elections, the way foreign actors were able successfully to go straight to the voter in a way that was covert, that was hidden, so that the victims didn't even realize it was coming from a foreign actor. And that's what we're studying, that's what we're researching, that's what we're seeing as a government. We have created the new site task force, which brings together CSE, CSIS, and the RCMP to monitor this type of threat. But we wanted Canadians to be aware of today is that we are ready, we are aware of what's going on, and Canadians, by having that information, will be empowered. They will be able to use that information in order to make decisions and ensure that the results of the 29 election were decided by Canadians.
Can I just...
Oh, sorry.
Sure.
Je peux répondre en anglais?
Yeah, sure.
The report, I think, does a good job of explaining how the global trends are manifesting themselves and that there is an increased attention to these kinds of tools against advanced democracy. So it is something that we have to consider across the board and understand that also once actors see certain successes out there, that there will be copycat behavior. So we've really tried very hard to distance ourselves from the specific actors in this report and to look at across the board all of the different activities that could be threats to Canada.
Alex, go ahead.
You declined to bring in concrete rules for political parties to govern how they manage Canadians' private information that they collect. There's no oversight, no review, basically no law. Do you think that makes Canadians more safe or less safe heading into an election where your own intelligence agencies have said that basically we're facing state-sponsored hacking of political parties right now?
So one of the first things that I did as Minister of Democratic Institutions was ensure that the CSE was able to provide advice and guidance to political parties for how best to protect the information that they have. It is up to political parties as to whether or not they have access to that advice. And in fact, I don't know the answer to that because we have purposely put a shield between that information to protect the independence of political parties. This is a really important question that I have also asked the Procedure and House Affairs Committee in Parliament to study specifically privacy and political parties, understanding that political parties do play a unique role within Canadian society to engage voters in the political process. However, recognizing that there is an important element to protecting Canadians' privacy. How can we do that in a way that enables political parties to continue to have that important engagement, provides them the independence that they need and require to operate in a highly political environment while also protecting Canadians' data? And this is something that I think can be achieved, but I think requires more study, and I would hope that Parliament would take it up.
Minister, the Ethics Committee just released a report in 2018 with all three major parties agreeing that privacy rules are needed with political parties. So why do you think that the Procedure and House Affairs Committee has to study it when we have literally just received a report supported by Liberals, Conservatives, and the NDP saying that we need privacy rules for political parties?
So I think it's one thing to say we need privacy rules and another thing to say how those privacy rules would be implemented in the political space. And so I'm not disagreeing with the fact that we need privacy rules. The area that I would like to see more study, and I think needs to be done in a thoughtful manner, is that of how those rules would be applied to ensure that political parties can continue that important engagement, but figuring out how there is oversight in a way that wouldn't impede their political activities as well, because understanding that political parties have to operate separate from government, which is the absolute right thing to do. So how do we make sure that we create that regulatory framework that will enable and continue that independence while also protecting Canadians' data?
Marie Vestel, Le Devoir.
Good morning, Ms. Gould. You said that we're considering legislating or regulating social platforms, but there's not much time before the next election. Why haven't you legislated yet? How do you explain? You say you're frustrated, but at the same time you've done nothing. That's an excellent question. What I'd like to say is that over the past 2.5 years, we've learned a lot about how digital platforms work. When I took this position and we looked at cyber threats to elections, we thought it was hack and leak type things that we saw in 2016. But in the course of the past 2.5 years, myself, and our government and governments all around the world have discovered a lot more about what is going on